US President Donald Trump is on his way to Alaska for a face-to-face summit with Russia's Vladimir Putin, a meeting that could decide the fate of the war in Ukraine and the future security of Europe. Ahead of the meeting, President Trump claimed that President Putin was ready to end his war in Ukraine, and he raised the prospect of a second meeting that would include Ukraine's Volodymr Zelenskyy, who wasn't invited to Alaska. The Kremlin says such a three-way meeting would only be possible if today's talks bear results. Well, President Trump has floated the controversial idea that Ukraine and Russia might have to swap territory as part of a ceasefire deal. He was asked on board Air Force One if this idea was going to be discussed.
They'll be discussed, but I've got to let Ukraine make that decision. And I think they'll make a proper decision. But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. I'm here to get them at a table. And I think you have two sides. Look, Vladimir Putin wanted to take all of Ukraine. If I wasn't president, he would right now be taking all of Ukraine. But he's not going to do it.
Well, let's explore this with Michael Kimmage. He's a political analyst and director of the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. He joins us from Vilnius. So welcome to DW. Earlier this week, President Trump was lowering expectations, telling everyone this was just a feel-out meeting, as he called it. Today, he's tweeting that it's high stakes. What do you think? How high are today's stakes?
I think in terms of speaking to the public, defining this conflict, as it were, to the world, the stakes are extremely high. You know, it is a war to which people pay attention on a regular basis, but there are many other issues out there, and this has really, really drawn attention to it. So whether or not President Trump can deliver anything, and I have my skepticism there, the focus on this is just extraordinary and will be for the foreseeable future.
And when we hear the possibility floated from the Kremlin that a three-way meeting might be possible if Alaska talks bear results, does this give you hope, or is this the usual Kremlin conditionality that never gets met?
I don't feel especially hopeful. It's very, very unlikely to me, I think, that President Putin would validate President Zelenskyy in that way. President Putin began the war trying to knock President Zelenskyy out of office and perhaps even to kill him. I don't think that he's changed his mindset too much in the intervening 3.5 years. So I think it's just very unlikely to happen. But, you know, all of this seems so hastily done. It's hard to imagine that the incredible intricacies of resolving this war could be unspooled in such a quick fashion. Trump surprises us regularly, so who knows what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. But I think a Trump-Zelenskyy-Putin meeting is really, really unlikely.
Right. Today's meeting, then, who has what to gain from it? President Putin would have us believe that he can keep this war going forever, while there's nothing, of course, to stop Donald Trump finally deciding to wash his hands of this business.
That's very true. I don't think that the meeting will pressure Russia to stop the war. And it's anybody's guess whether President Trump will escalate or de-escalate his support for Ukraine in the wake of this meeting. Putin gains the obvious. He gains a wide degree of recognition. I think the meeting, up to a point, legitimates the war. And we'll see what President Trump's messaging is when they have, as I assume they will, a press conference. And so to that degree, Putin gains something of substance from his vantage point. I'm not quite sure what Trump can gain apart from putting himself at the very center of the story, which of course he loves to do. And there he stands for the time being. But whether he can really gain something for Europe, for Ukraine, for the United States, whether he can really wind back the war, I would be shocked if that were the outcome of this particular meeting.
If I read you right, you seem doubtful of whether President Trump will actually follow through on his threat of severe consequences if Putin doesn't stop this war.
Yeah, I'm very doubtful because, you know, there have been many ceasefires that the U.S. has suggested over the course of the spring and summer since President Trump came to office. Russia has blown by all of them, and there haven't really been too many consequences, as far as I can tell, from the White House. So maybe Trump will change gears now and start to impose costs on Russia in a way that he has not over the last 8-9 months. But my guess is that the pattern has been set already of Trump asking for outcomes, Putin not delivering, and the cycle just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, one of those outcomes, of course, is this notion of swapping land and giving up territory. President Trump has ruled out NATO membership for Ukraine, which, of course, is a red line as far as Kyiv is concerned, as is the notion for both sides of losing territory to the other. So it seems going into this that there's really nothing to talk about if both sides dig their heels in.
The thing to talk about might be a ceasefire. That to me is picturable, but I agree entirely. Swapping territory, maybe a year ago when Ukraine held, bits and pieces of Russian territory, that could have been swapped for territory that Russia would then return to Ukraine in Ukraine. But what is the swap going to consist of now? Would Ukraine be swapping territory that it currently controls for its own territory that's under Russian occupation? President Zelenskyy has been adamant that should not happen, and he has the backing of almost every major European country in that regard. So yes, these swaps seem to be either offhand statements or opening gambits in the negotiations. I don't see much that's really credible or actionable behind them, and Trump is, as he sort of senses, and with the messaging this week, he's about to hit the wall of Ukrainian reluctance or intransigence.
Political analyst Michael Kimmage from the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, of course, today's talks are being watched very closely around the world and indeed in Ukraine. Our correspondent, Max Zander, has been speaking to Ukrainian soldiers to get their views.
The whole world just wants to end this war, but without taking Ukraine into account, without considering our wishes, our land, and our people. I don't think these negotiations will bring anything good. Everything will simply continue as it is now. Of course, I want things to change, for the war to end, and for our land to remain ours. We are not in a position right now for Russia to even consider real negotiations. In my view, until they are put under serious pressure, they will not agree to talks. They will just drag the process out. If it could end like this for everyone, with all our soldiers returning home from captivity, and our neighbor leaving our country, returning to the border or to whatever is agreed on, that will be wonderful.
Let's explore this with Tyson Barker. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and joins us from the Ukrainian capital. Welcome back to DW, Tyson. No Ukrainian delegation at these talks about peace in their country. What are you hearing from Ukrainian leaders?
Well, there's immense anxiety here in Kyiv. And of course, everybody in Kyiv is paying attention. Everybody knows that the meeting will end around midnight, and people are watching their televisions, from the elites to every household in the country. They're white-knuckling it because, again, they're not the agents of their own future in this case. And there are major questions about what can be negotiated about a country that has given so much to protect and defend itself over the past three years.
Donald Trump, of course, has had a troubled relationship with Volodymr Zelenskyy in the past. EU leaders have expressed fears that President Putin could sway Mr. Trump during these talks. Is that a possibility Ukrainian leaders are preparing for?
So I think everybody is aware, both in Europe and in Ukraine, in the EU and Ukraine, that President Putin is coming with a set of maps to show President Trump and to talk him through a long history, a long wind-up of history, historiography, revisionist history, to say that the reason why Russia is doing this is because it's been the victim of history, and that Ukraine has been one of its, basically to turn the narrative on its head. And if you're not familiar with Putin's narrative of grievance, it can be easy to be swayed or at least beaten down, because he tends to talk in these terms for hours on end. And everybody expects this tactic to be used. It's a classic tactic that he developed in the KGB. And there's great worry in Kyiv and other capitals in Europe that Trump will come out of this meeting, because often he is easily influenced by the last person he's heard. And of course, President Putin is a very compelling speaker. that this narrative actually has credibility, and it doesn't, because it's often based in complete factual inaccuracies and grievance.
Right. So no Ukraine at this meeting, no room for European leaders either. Does Europe have any role to play?
I mean, ultimately, Europe is going to be responsible, and I think they made this quite clear on Wednesday during their call with President Trump. Europe and Ukraine are going to be the ultimate caretakers, guardians of Ukraine's future in whatever form it takes. And so they have the biggest stake, the Ukrainians themselves and the Europeans, who are going to be underwriting its economic future and perhaps its security future in whatever outcome takes place. And that's why they really try to emphasize the sense to President Trump that there can't be any negotiations about the big questions: territory, security guarantees, Ukraine's geopolitical trajectory that it's determining, or military size, without Ukrainians and Europeans present. And that message seemed to have impact on Wednesday, but we'll see what happens on the ground today on Friday.
Because this is the thing. It's hard to keep up with Donald Trump's changes of mind, not only about this meeting, but on so many other issues. European leaders came out of that meeting on Wednesday saying that we're all on the same page. They must be biting their nails to see if that situation continues.
They're completely biting their nails. I think that the biggest worry right now, they're hopeful that these guardrails remain in place, that President Trump has received the message that these big, let's say, existential questions need to be negotiated directly with the Ukrainians and with the Europeans, who are two actors that have a major stake in this conflict. Obviously, the biggest stake in this conflict, the Ukrainians, and but that doesn't mean that's the end of the worry. The worry is that the Trump administration will try to cauterize this conflict and normalize their relationship with Russia in other areas, be it commercial ties, be it the Arctic, be it nuclear. You can't slave off the relationship with Ukraine. Ukraine is at the center of Russia's relationship with the world. And until this conflict is solved, it can't be brought in from the cold. It needs to remain the kind of state, a war criminal state, that it's been designated since the full-scale invasion began.
You see, this notion of Russia's isolation from the rest of the world, we have Kremlin officials saying that today's meeting is about more than just Ukraine. This is well, I'll ask you, is this about Moscow being determined not just to do a deal with Washington, but to be asserting itself on the world stage on this issue and elsewhere?
Look, President Putin has already put several points on the board in advance of this Alaska meeting. First, he has achieved something that was not achievable since the invasion in February 2022. Namely, he has been brought in from the cold as a pariah state, brought back into the international community by the United States. He is traveling to the United States. He's there right now. Second, he has made the threat of sanctions and tariffs much less credible, because that was supposed to come into effect last week. Nothing has changed on the ground, but those sanctions remain out of effect. Third, he's given a massive morale boost to his troops on the front lines and to his domestic public by basically saying, look, the will of the international community is starting to break on this case. So it's extremely, I mean, he has already succeeded in this goal of basically, getting the objectives that Russia sees as most important.
All right, thanks for talking us through that, Tyson. Tyson Barker from the Atlantic Council in Kyiv.